How you feeling? How you feeling right now?
I'm feeling light on money.
Yo, what up guys? Today, we're featuring my friend's build inside the Lian Li Q58. He reached out to me back in the middle of January and was like, hey, I think I'm ready to finally build a PC. And it was still during the GPU hikes with the shortages, and the only way to get them was through Best Buy or Newegg. So literally 2 days later, after he told me that he wanted to build a PC, I was able to score him an Evga 3060 Ti. However, the only issue though was he lived in Southern California and I lived in the Bay Area. With all that being said, we had to travel all the way down south to help him build this one out. And along the way, we stopped at Microcenter and got to play with some cats. So stay tuned for all that. Let's get going with this build. With the GPU out of the way, the hardest part obviously, I asked him, what's your budget? How big of a case do you want? Are you limited by space? And I told him about the ITX world. And I gave him different options like the NR200P, the Meshalicious, and the Lian Li Q58. As we all know now, we went with the Q58. So with the case out of the way, the GPU out of the way, now we're left with the CPU and motherboard combo. He had two options, Team Red or Team Blue. With Team Blue, he had the latest 12th gen Intel, and those were giving better performance than the AMD Ryzen 5000 series. However though, the Ryzen 5000 series had better availability with motherboards and a little bit cheaper too compared to DDR5 over on Team Intel. But because he wanted to future-proof himself and he heard about better specs on Intel's end, we went with Team Blue. In the end, he went with the 12600K over the 12400 as those were in his price range. Saved some money going with the 12400F, but he wanted to future-proof himself with more cores with the 12600K. So ITX motherboards are very sparse with DDR4 specifically. B660 boards were not a thing yet at the time, and the only options were very expensive Z690 boards. However, we were lucky enough to pick up an ASRock Z690 ITX board. I know it's not great because it doesn't have the most VRMs and it doesn't have a good brand name recognition quality either, as it being ASRock. But for his use case, it's within his price range and he didn't plan on doing overclocking at all. With the GPU, CPU, and case covered, we had to pick up a couple of things on Microcenter.
We've arrived in LA at Microcenter. Well, Tustin, California technically. But we're out here hoping to pick up some last spare parts for a friend's build. This is gonna be intense. I've never been to Microcenter ever.
What are these carts?
I've never seen carts like this ever. What is that cart? Oh my goodness.
First off, being the RAM, their rep gave us a couple options, but we went with the G.Skill 3600 CL16. This was primarily picked based off of a value perspective. Next was the AIO. Julian originally wanted to go with a CPU cooler, with a tower cooler or a low profile cooler. However, I found this out Friday night and we were limited on time. But luckily, Microcenter had us covered. By the way, this is not sponsored by Microcenter in any way. They didn't have any low profile cooler, so we had to go with an AIO option. There's a couple of them to pick from, but we ended up with the MSI MAG Core Liquid P240. This goes along with his blackout theme. The only issue here is the pump was inside the red and the red sits at the top of the case. So I told him to keep an eye out on it in the future. Lastly, he had to power this up. We went with Corsair SF750. If you didn't know, I had a couple of issues in a previous video. You can check it down in the description below, but wait till the end of this video and build to go check that out later. Lastly, the storage solution. We went with the 1TB 970 EVO Pro. It's purely for gaming, so he just wanted the bare minimums in this case.
All right, after leaving Microcenter. Hey, yeah, all right. Picked up the stuff we needed, got a cooler, got a power supply, there's some RAM and SSD in there. Got myself some personal stuff. Should be good.
Before we get to the build though, I did want to say something. I have a bunch of content coming up as we stopped at Microcenter. I picked up a few goodies as well over my shoulder. You guys can't see, but I have a couple cases extra to check out for you guys. So definitely hit the subscribe button down below as well as hit the like button if you can't wait for more ITX cases coming up.
here successfully used the manual as well as understanding YouTube and Redditing to how to short this.
Close the thing immediately.
But yeah, it worked for sure. So we got this plugging through the HDMI into the GPU. And we're gonna install Windows OS like this before we shove it inside the Q58.
So after all this, we had to stress test a little bit as well as run the benchmarks that we normally do, TimeSpy, R23, whatnot. So first off, for his 12600K score in the CPU, featuring R23, the multi-core score came in at 16948, and then his single core score came in at 1873. It reached up to almost 4.9 gigahertz while running this benchmark. Now onto the GPU score. For TimeSpy, we ran it, he got an 11,180, and for his Port Royal score, he got a 6,613. By the way, with this build, he wanted to hide his cable mesh, so he put the black mesh side to hide all the cables on the CPU side, but he put the glass side on the GPU side. So I was like, hey, we should run some stress tests on this a little bit too. So I ran these stress tests on the CPU, and it topped out at 79 degrees Celsius. So some final notes on this build process, specifically in the Q58. After we tested everything on his bench setup, moving all his parts directly into his Q58 took about 1.5 hours or so. If you didn't notice, it was light out, and by the time we finished, it was already dark. Because the AIO, it was brand new and the tubing was very stiff, it was kind of hard to figure out where we should place that, and we had to lift up the radiator a couple of times to figure out which orientation we wanted to put it. In the end, we kind of just shoved it in the corner in order for the mesh panel to close the case up. Onto some GPU issues with moving the riser cable around. I told him to go with the 4.0 PCIe riser so we didn't have any troubles there, but when you try to slot the GPU into the cable itself, there's two screws that attach to the GPU, and you had to unscrew them and you had to shift them slightly enough to get them into the slots in the back of the case. Now, I know he wanted to hide a lot of the cable mess on the CPU side, and running some benchmarks on the GPU side with it having the glass next to it, it got up to 91.5 degrees Celsius max, but this was just the T-junction memory temperatures though. I messaged him a couple of days later and he said this PC is so freaking fast, so fast, he didn't know what to do after he died so many times in Elden Rings. All in all, building the Q58 was pretty fun. Along with that, making the trip to Microcenter. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe down below to stay tuned for some upcoming RTX stuff, as well as seeing some friends, building the PC of course. Stay tuned for the cinematic featuring cats. Peace.